Renaissance people, if you are enjoying the Italian Renaissance podcast, I have good news. We're now active on Patreon. You can show your love for the show by becoming a patron and get access to additional resources, information, and artworks. Better yet, those who join the Renaissance Master or Renaissance Patron tier will get access to at least one additional podcast episode each month. My goal is to ensure that the main podcast remains a free, accessible source for everyone. Become a patron today through the link in the show notes to support the continued production of new episodes and help build and maintain this community. The Italian Renaissance shop is now also active on Etsy, linked in the show notes. Sport our logo or choose from a growing selection of Italian art-inspired designs. Discounts are offered to select Patreon tiers as well. Your support has my immortal gratitude. Now, enjoy the show. Welcome to the Italian Renaissance podcast, where we discuss essential topics about the art and culture of 15th and 16th century Italy. I'm your host, Lawrence Gianangeli. Andiamo avanti. Having crawled through Inferno and all of its ghastly glory, I think it's fair, dear listeners, to treat the second and third canticles of the Divine Comedy with a touch of brevity. I don't want to discount the quality and magnificence of Purgatory and Paradise, but there is something extremely compelling about how Dante imagines the anguish of the eternally damned, which is why Inferno had an episode of its own. Like Inferno, where there's clear divisions within Purgatory and Paradise. So I'll give those divisions, picking a couple of episodes from each to go into more specific details. These books follow the same structure as Inferno. Let's review that. 33 cantos each, totaling 100 cantos, including the introductory one. That means one introductory canto, and then Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradise each have 33, totaling in 100, right? Each canto is composed of tercets, right, lines of 3, of varying number per canto, and all are written in terza rima. Terza rima is the structure of the rhyme scheme that I detailed in the previous episode, so be sure to check that out if you need to review what terza rima is. If we imagine Dante's view of the structure of earth, up to this point he has met with Virgil and traveled into the earth, through the gates of hell, into the infernal city of Dis, and to the frozen center of the earth where Satan lives. And remember, he was chewing on Judas Iscariot and the other two, Brutus and Cassius. So from there, he climbed through the remainder of the earth. So the frozen center of hell is in the center. And then he has to climb through to this isolated island of Mount Purgatory. Remember, Ulysses saw the island and was killed in the waves, right? And this is where the opening canto starts, at the base of the mountain. So what is Purgatory and what is its structure? Dante tells us this in the very first lines. Now I'm going to read to you the opening. This is Canto 1, line 1 of Purgatory. To run through better waters, the little ship of my wit now hoists its sails, leaving behind it a sea so cruel. And I will sing of that second realm, where the human spirit purges itself and becomes worthy to ascend to heaven. Right? So we're still in the earthly realm. Purgatory is where sinners are who can still atone for their sins. So they're not eternally damned like those in hell. However, they still have to earn their way into paradise. Okay? So do not think that because we're out of hell, right? What did he call it? That sea so cruel, that there's not punishment. The souls of purgatory are working to rid themselves of their worldly vices. Unlike the damned, the souls can earn their way into heaven. We should view Dante as being like these people. As we go through purgatory, he too has to ascend to earn his way into heaven. Before arriving in purgatory itself, Dante and Virgil pass through anti-purgatory, and this is in 2 stages. Those who put off accepting the salvation of God must wait to enter purgatory as they did in life. These sentences can be reduced by prayer for those who remain alive. Right? So the idea that maybe your loved one's soul is in purgatory, if you are alive on earth, you can pray and it will reduce their sentence in purgatory. Right? And the second of the anti-purgatory houses the repentant, or those who prayed for salvations upon their deaths, but did not live a virtuous life. Upon being carried to the gates of purgatory in his sleep, right? He falls asleep after seeing the 2 circles of anti-purgatory. Dante prepares to ascend what are the 7 terraces of the mountain. We had 9 circles in hell. Here we have 7 terraces, and these each correspond with one of the 7 deadly sins. So an angel inscribes 7 P's across Dante's head, each which will be removed for each of the terraces he ascends and learns his lesson, right? I really want to focus on Canto 10 and 11. This is the first terrace that treats pride. These cantos are so crucial in how we understand Dante's thought as it relates to the purposes of this podcast, and so many Renaissance topics we've already discussed. So we can see a clear separation from Dante and the line of thought that dominates Quattrocento Florence, showing how Dante is still a product of the Middle Ages. Let me explain. First, I want to give you guys an awesome word when we're talking about this sort of literature, and it's going to go into my explanation of Dante here. It's called ekphrasis. Ekphrasis. What ekphrasis refers to is detailed descriptions of visual works of art within literature, specifically as a literary device, describing art. That's the idea. Not art that exists already, but rather inventing literary art, right? So in Canto 10, Dante uses this. He uses ekphrasis to detail relief sculpture as he sees it in the first terrace of Mount Purgatory. Now, relief sculpture, for those of you who are not familiar with that term, is shallow carved sculpture into like a bed of rock or marble. Like high relief would be like deeper, whereas low relief, which would be more shallow. We looked at Michelangelo's Battle of the Lapiths and Centaurs. That would be known as a relief sculpture. Okay, so let me go to Canto 10 here, and I'm going to read for you. Upon ascending to the terrace, he sees that the cliff was, and I'm starting at line 31 here of Canto 10, was of white marble and adorned with such carvings that not only Polyclitus, but even nature would be put to scorn here. The angel who came to earth with the decree of peace for many years bewailed with tears, which opened heaven after its long prohibition, appeared before us so truly, carved there in his gentle bearing, that he did not seem a silent image. One would have sworn that he was saying Ave, for imagined there was she who turned the key to open the high love. Images of humility shows scorn for naturalism. Dante is a product of the Middle Ages, bound by his contemporary art to disapprove of those who seek to emulate nature, right? He's looking at this sculpture on the wall and he says, it looks so real that it looks as if it is emulating nature, that it's real, that it looks like it's speaking, right? That it's saying Ave. That is the ekphrastic introduction to the Terrace of Pride. naturalistic scenes which are invented, right? These are made-up reliefs. This type of art was not usually practiced at his time. The achievement of it foreshadows the future Renaissance. Like, if you remember, Leonardo da Vinci and his insistence on naturalism. Do we remember that discussion? I'm certain Leonardo, over 100 years later, would scorn Dante on this matter, right? Because Dante's argument is that essentially, to depict nature is to try to create in the manner in which God did. So there's some type of heresy or trying to be like God in attempting to make images look real. Okay, right? The Middle Ages wasn't really concerned with this. When you look at medieval art, trying to produce naturalistic, realistic images wasn't its concern. We talked about this in the very first episode when analyzing the difference between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. We're not looking at a lack of skill in the Middle Ages, even though maybe some of the images could be talked about in that way, but we're looking at a cultural idea of image production that does not want to blaspheme. So we often get it wrong when we think that the Renaissance outdoes the Middle Ages in terms of skill, even though there are innovations of technique, of course there are. But realistically, we have to look at the Middle Ages in a way that it doesn't want that. Part of the humanistic revolution that hits in the Renaissance is moving away from that social mentality. Okay? Do we understand that? How we can differentiate between thinkers like Leonardo da Vinci in the late Quattrocento and how the early Trecento, the early 1300s, thinkers like Dante are depicting art production. It gets a little bit better here on Canto 11, still on the Terrace of Pride. Even as he writes, Dante is positioning himself in a prideful stance, right? He has to learn how to get over that. Canto 11 opens with his own version of the Lord's Prayer, expanded and converted into his terza rima. Is this not boastful? Yeah. He talks in these cantos about the vanity of art as something inconstant, as something fading, right? This is really, really interesting. Listen to this little piece from Canto 11. I'm on lines 91 to 96. Dante says, "O vain glory of human powers, how briefly it stays green at the summit if it is not followed by cruder ages. Cimabue believed he held the field in painting, and now Giotto has the cry, so that the fame of the first is darkened." Cimabue was Giotto's instructor. If you've listened to some of my past episodes, we have talked about Giotto as this proto-Renaissance painter who's moving away from the medieval kind of themes. Not themes, but ways of painting. He's going towards that naturalism that Dante is discrediting here. And he's talking about Cimabue, Giotto's master, and how Giotto outdoes him, so that Cimabue's fame is only green until his predecessor comes and does better, right? And what does Dante say about this following his discussion of Cimabue and Giotto in the fleeting presence of art? He says on line 97, Canto 11, "Just so, one Guido has taken from the other the glory of our language, and perhaps he is born who will drive both of them from the nest." He's talking about the two Guidos, the Guido Cavalcanti, the Florentine Stil Novisto, and Guido Guinizelli, right? These are the great poets of Dante's time, and he says right here, perhaps he is born who will drive both of them from the nest. He's talking about himself, right? Dante is boasting, showing himself within his poetry guilty of the sin of the terrace he is passing through. He has to show that Probably because he doesn't actually think that, but also because he has to learn to overcome his own pride in order to ascend to heaven. I think. That's my thoughts. I don't really know. But, on this terrace, the punishment for the prideful is to carry these large boulders on their backs. They're never able to look up at these allegorical carvings of humility, as in their life their pride prevented them from doing so also. I hope that was all clear. The second terrace houses the envious. They have their eyes sewn closed so that they cannot, envy through the eyes, right? The third focuses on wrath. In the fourth terrace, sloth, where these people who were lazy in their lives are forced to run constantly without rest. The fifth terrace is for avarice, covering excessive greed, ambition, and desire. The sixth is for the gluttonous. These poor souls, guys. They're starved and deprived of water, which is awful. But what's more, they're surrounded by fruit trees bearing fruit too high for them to touch. So there's food, but they can't get it, right? I can imagine in a pre-industrialized world that eating in excess in the face of extreme class inequality, right, like the Middle Ages, and a work written by a political representative like Dante, that gluttony can warrant such a punishment, right? It's a different time where hunger has different implications. So the last terrace treats the lustful. The sinners here have to purge their lust by running through flames. Here we find Guido Guinizelli. We just talked about him, one of the Guidos that Dante claims to have passed over. He was one of the great poets of the Dolce Stil Novo. Remember how that poetry movement focused on admiration for divine love, but it was, of course, erotic too. Lust. Dante is guilty of this as well, and he knows Beatrice awaits him at the top of purgatory, right? Who he has absolutely lusted after. So he has to get rid of this lust before he can meet her, which is really kind of brilliant, I think. Him coming to this moment of realizing that the divine love that he's always represented has to be purged of its eroticism. Okay? So that, does he? I don't know. I don't think that he actually does. I think he's always got these kind of sexy eyes for Beatrice, but that's neither here nor there. So he too has to pass through the fire to cleanse himself of this unholy lust. Renewed and reverent divine love for her. Right? Now, given that each of the 7 terraces, one of the peas was removed from his head. Remember, the angel puts these peas on his head. Right? Passing through the fire removes the last pea. And here is where Virgil departs and Beatrice takes over as the guide. This is an essential moment, and I want to read another set of lines for you regarding part of Virgil's last words to Dante. So Virgil says to Dante, "The temporal fire and the eternal you have seen, my son. You have come to a place where I by myself discern no further. I have drawn you here with wit and with art. Your own pleasure now take as leader. You are beyond the steep ways, beyond the narrows." He has climbed through hell, up Mount Purgatory, and Virgil can go no further. Virgil, this classical poet who represents the classical period that Dante loves, but has to reconcile with his current Christian culture, does not go beyond the earth. Keep that in mind in the future. When we talk about the Renaissance and we talk about Renaissance art, it's always like this, a reconciliation with the classical world, with the contemporary culture. It's not just narrative that denies Virgil entry to paradise, right? The value of the knowledge of the ancients for Dante cannot go into the heavenly realm. It is bound to the earth. It has its uses, but it cannot take you as far as you need for salvation. Okay? So Dante meets Beatrice at the top of Mount Purgatory in what is called the earthly paradise, that is, the Garden of Eden, ready to leave the mountain and climb into the heavens. So we have ventured through the 9 circles of hell, the 7 terraces of purgatory, and now Dante, with his new guide Beatrice, is going to ascend through the 9 spheres of heaven. Right? So now this entire epic is stacked with a very complicated allegory, religious matter, and very dense theological themes that are very hard to unpack without a more complicated sort of format, especially without a very solid background of medieval culture. This is especially true of the Paradiso canticle. And so I want to preemptively say that this last book is getting a rough and general overview, not as detailed as Inferno, right? Let's look at how he introduces Paradiso so we can understand the context that he wants to present it. This is Canto 1, line 1 of Paradiso. He says, "The glory of him who moves all things penetrates through the universe and shines forth in one place more and less elsewhere. In the heaven that receives most of his light have I been, and I have seen things that I, one who comes down from there, cannot remember and cannot utter. For as it draws near to its desire, our intellect goes so deep that the memory cannot follow it." He's saying, I've been to heaven, and I'm telling you of heaven now, but although my brain, my spirit, perceived everything, my intellect cannot recount it to tell. So that he is going to try to tell this story, even though it's a story that cannot be told. So we have to keep in mind that Paradiso, even though it is going to be as thorough as the other books, leaves things out that we cannot perceive as readers or listeners. Okay? So, in any case, the ultimate goal is to reach the highest heavenly circle called Empyrean, which is where God lives or exists. I guess he doesn't live. I don't know. Each of the circles he moves through corresponds with a celestial body. This is important. We'll get to that. And in each circle, those found there are still, I don't know if I'd say guilty of something, although every soul, according to Beatrice, lives in Empyrean, but there are those deserving of higher circles of heaven and those in lower ones. Okay? So keep in mind, these souls are not suffering, they're not tormenting, they're not laboring, they are experiencing a sort of bliss or delight. They just rank differently. The first circle is the moon, the lowest heaven, okay? And the second is Mercury. For those who are just in their lives, fair, right? But suffer from being a little bit too ambitious. Here we find the Emperor Justinian. Just a side note, the same city where Dante dies, Ravenna, Justinian is depicted among the most celebrated Byzantine mosaics in all of Italy at a place called San Vitale. I highly recommend a visit to Ravenna and San Vitale. Additionally, Justinian is the emperor who had built the Hagia Sophia at the time it was the capital city of Constantinople, the Roman Empire, modern-day Istanbul. I was very lucky to visit Istanbul slightly before the pandemic hit, and let me say, the Hagia Sophia is a structure to behold, especially keeping in mind that it was one of the largest domed structures in the world, along with the Pantheon in Rome, leading up to the building of the Florence Cathedral, which was not complete in Dante's time. But that's Emperor Justinian in the second circle of heaven in Mercury, right? The third sphere is the circle of Venus. Keep in mind, guys, that the planets and their names are still corresponding with their pagan equivalents. Back to reconciliation, right? Dante is very aware of this, and he has to still treat it in light of his Christianity. Venus is traditionally a symbol of the erotic, of lust, of absolute beauty. I'm reading the first 5 lines of Canto 8. The world used to believe, to its peril, that the lovely Cyprian radiated mad desire, turning in the 3rd epicycle, and therefore those ancient peoples, in their ancient error, paid the honor of sacrifice and votive cry, not merely to her. And then he goes on to talk about other erotic figures, right? But the people in this sphere, see, he calls her the lovely Cyprian. Of course, if you remember the birth of Venus, Venus's birth, she arrives on the island of Cyprus. She's called the Cyprian. But he says they worship her in error, sacrificed her in light of her eroticism. That they're wrong. And that the people in this sphere of heaven, in the sphere of Venus, they have been awarded their place in heaven for their devotion to the love of God, right, and of humankind. He is saying this is not a symbol of erotic love. He's trying to make a modern significance for Venus, who is named in light of pagan worship. Does that make sense? How he's rewriting these themes to try to reconcile them with Christianity, the same way Virgil can't go into heaven, right? The same way you can't depict naturalistic things because that's too godlike, okay? He's going to do this more. We'll see that. The 4th sphere is the sun, where some major figures of medieval theology reside. Here you see St. Thomas Aquinas. You even see King Solomon of the Bible. In another group of heavenly beings, Dante speaks with St. Bonaventure. Remember this, the 4th sphere, the circle of the sun. This name should sound familiar to you, St. Bonaventure. Do we remember that? If you recall, we talked about how Stilnovisti poets talked about the philosophy of light, or maybe didn't talk about, but used, referenced. That is that divinity is the source of light. And for those poets, their divine love was often referred to in those terms. And it makes sense that he would be in the sphere of the sun, right, that produces light. So when we come to the 5th spheres of Mars, remember, Mars was the Roman god of war. Here are the fighters of the faith. Naturally, holy warriors who come together, their spirits, form a cross. Among others, we have some very important French figures here, like Emperor Charlemagne and Roland, who is one of the most prolific figures in medieval French epic, a warrior of the Holy Roman Empire, and he becomes an essential figure in Renaissance literature with Orlando Furioso, right? Roland, the French, Roland, becomes Orlando in Italian epics of the Renaissance, okay? The 6th sphere, Jupiter, we're doing this again. It has the souls of just rulers. Jupiter, his Greek equivalent would be Zeus, however promiscuous, was a ruler of the Roman pantheon. Jupiter was, right? A pantheon being a cohort of deities. These souls take the form of an eagle, which is a classic symbol for Jupiter. So Dante is always playing with this, reconceptualizing classical symbols into his Christian context. King David is one of the residents here, and if you haven't listened to the episode about Donatello's very steamy, very homoerotic sculpture of David, go back and give it a listen. I think that's probably my favorite episode to date. I just think it's so fun, so listen to that, okay? So, Dante will criticize the state of the church through St. Peter Damian and St. Benedict in the 7th sphere of Saturn, right? Notice how the holy figures are becoming more prevalent the higher we go. In the 8th sphere, the sphere of the fixed stars, Dante meets the Virgin Mary, he meets Peter and John, and he even speaks with Adam, right? Adam and Eve, not Eve. He speaks with Adam from the Garden of Eden, which he had already passed through, who is now in the 8th sphere of heaven. And Dante uses him to try to give an approximate date to the world since his concept of biblical creation. Listen to what Adam says to Dante in Paradise. Adam tells Dante, Down there, whence your lady sent Virgil, for 4,302 turnings of the sun, I yearned for this assembly, and I saw him return along the road of all of his lights 930 times while I lived on earth. Right? So he lived 930 years on earth. He tells of his suffering first. He says, I was down in limbo, right, where Virgil was. So he went down to spend some time in just outside the gates of hell for, hold on, I have to look again. I've lost it. 4,302 turnings of the sun. So according to Dante, he lived 930 years, and then 4,302 years in hell is from the date of Adam's creation to Dante finding him in the upper reaches of heaven. That's very interesting, no? At last, Dante comes to what is called the premium noble, the ninth sphere, before entering Empyrean, the realm of God that exists outside of the physical realm. To tell it briefly, the poem ends in Empyrean with Dante having a vision of God. I'm going to read to you these very last lines, the last lines in the trilogy of the Divine Comedy here that's going to end it. Listen closely. These are the last lines of the 33rd canto of Paradiso. Here my high imagining failed of power, but already my desire and the velle were turned, like a wheel being moved evenly by the love that moves the sun and other stars. These lines are not 100% clear. However, we do not return to earth, but end on the highest of notes possible, the state of Dante's pure ecstasy, as he, after 100 long cantos, sees, envisions divine perfection. It's not Beatrice. It's the pure love of God that moves the sun and other stars. What a ride. How do we feel? If you've come this far with me, thank you. It was also an interesting experience to try to condense these works. An incredibly difficult experience, mind you. And I'm sure if any Dantisti are listening to this show, they may bemoan some ignored detail or another. But, guys, I had to be selective. You could have an entire podcast dedicated solely, not to Dante entirely, but just this work. I think this was sufficient for our purposes in understanding the Italian Renaissance and how this work helps to set up that cultural movement. Okay, let's think about this. What are the really important things that we see in Dante as a proto-Renaissance, proto-humanist thinker, writer, is the tendency to try to reconcile faith with classical culture. Now, it is not going to surge yet. It needs a little more time, a few more writers, before the general cultural consensus fully embraces the integration, the mass integration of paganness and mixes it with Christianity. We've talked about that ad nauseum already. Thank you guys for listening to this 3 exciting and interesting episodes on Dante, on Dante's poetry, his life, and his Divine Comedy. Okay? Please, please, please check out our Facebook, Instagram, follow, give the show a rating. I've noticed I've gotten some ratings in, and I really appreciate everyone who's done that. But the listenership that I'm seeing is pretty high, and I'm so excited about that. But I'm not getting the feedback and equivalent to that. I want to hear from you guys. I want to know what you think. I want to know what's working for you, and I want to know what's not working for you. So please reach out to me. Okay? I'm in the process of moving, so I may be delayed moving forward for the next couple of episodes, but I'll try really hard not to be. Until then, arrivederci.